All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. Judd, are you there?
Here.
All right. Well, welcome, Judd. We appreciate you taking time out of your day. I know you're busy, so we appreciate you stopping by today. So, Judd is the founder of ThinkProgress.org. Judd, as you may know, is very active on Twitter. Most of you have seen his handle. Please follow. I linked it in the um, channel and as well as general chat, and I'll link it again for you guys. Check out thinkprogress.org. Some great articles on there. So Judd is, in my opinion, anyway. Judd, you're a different type. I mean, we talked before, and you're willing to take on some of the toughest questions. He doesn't want anybody to hold back tonight. He mentioned that himself. I didn't even ask. He said, "Feel free to tell them to ask everything," and I love it. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Judd. I'm going to let him kind of speak to you guys about his background and how he started thinkprogress.org and kind of, what he's up to today. And then we'll jump into some user questions. And Judd, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks so much. Appreciate you having me here and getting to know this platform a little bit. It seems like you guys have a really active community. Think Progress, something that I started in 2005, on a newsletter for about a year and a half prior to that, and interested in, it sounds sort of silly, but at the time blogs were just starting. And so I just became really interested in the idea that, I didn't just have to have a newsletter that came out once in the morning. You could have something and there were no limitations on when you could post and when you could weigh in on things. And so we started it, and, the idea was to try to fill niche on the progressive side, the liberal side of of a place that is less just pure opinion and has grounding in research and facts. And so that's what we really started, really more, less as a media outlet and more as a blog. And did that. But then, over time, things have changed. In the beginning, you could just sort of put up a video clip and people were just interested in the fact that there were video clips on, this is really before YouTube and things like that. People were interested on just you putting video clips on the internet and of something that was said on TV that was interesting. But over time, that became much less interesting. And also a lot of the shorter moves from blogs to social media and a lot of online outlets. So online social media platforms. So we've developed and matured and, now are really a media outlet. We do a lot of reporting and journalism and more investigative reporting, more enterprise reporting, more original reporting. Whereas before we were kind of just more exclusively doing kind of action and research into things that other people are coming up with. So, we've got all sorts of things on the site, sports and cultural news, things about economics, LGBTQ, really run the whole gamut and just try to find places. We're about a 40-person newsroom, so we're not the biggest, but we try to find places where we can value. So anyway, I know people are here really not to hear me sort of give a long discussion about the site and its history, but to hear some answers to your questions. So I'm happy to just kind of leave it there and jump in.
All right, great. Thank you, Judd. So the first question is, Judd, I'm a follower of yours. Do you think the left have held the DNC accountable for its unfair mishandling in last year's primaries regarding Bernie And do you think the DNC members will ever change the superdelegate system designed to be an insurance policy for a desired outcome?
I think it would be great to get rid of the superdelegates. So I'll start with that second part. I think it is possible that they might get rid of them. It certainly doesn't seem to have done anyone the last few times, and there doesn't seem to be any real purpose to them. As you're going with politics, it becomes more untenable to have this idea that there's just random people who, theoretically, I don't think this has really ever happened, but theoretically they could shift the result from one candidate to the other. So I think there's good of that happening. As far as the DNC and the Bernie stuff, I don't know exactly what, as it does every year, the whole place turns over. So none of the people who were involved with that, Debbie Wasserman Schultz and all of her folks are all out, and it's all a new crew. My view is I really and would expect tons of people to be running in 2020, and I think the DNC would be wise to let that process play out and not try to towards any candidate.
All right, great.
Yeah. So hopefully that's an answer.
The next question comes from another user. Judd, how do we fight for trans rights in the age of Trump? And is the fight for transgender civil rights effectively dead for 4 to 8 years?
Dead because so much of this obviously occurs at the local level. And there's lots of important discussions and debates and policy changes that are happening. Don't have anything to do on the federal level. Obviously, there's been some pretty significant step backwards, especially with regards to the military and other things. But I don't think it's dead. I think that, one, there's an important fight on the state and local level, but then I also think, and this is sort of where often in the era of Trump, but there's an important role in trying to stand up and fight against some of the worst things that could happen on the federal level. And whether it's trans rights or healthcare or other things, I think there has been some success on the left of kind of curbing some of the most extreme policies that
Are you there, Judd?
I can hear you now. I couldn't hear you for a while.
No, sorry. I think you may get this. Sorry, you got stopped at curb where I heard.
I think I was just saying curb like the worst abuses that's possible still. So I wouldn't say that there's just nothing to do for 4 years. There's a lot to do, or 8 years, or however long it ends up being.
Right, or eternity. Who knows? Right?
Yeah.
So next question is from a user, and it is, Judd, what are your thoughts on the low standard of journalistic integrity exhibited by so many media outlets?
I don't 100% agree with the premise. I have a lot of issues myself with media coverage. And a lot of times we write about it on the site, places where we think people get things wrong. I do think that there's a lot of really great journalism that is going on too. I mean, we just saw this week with Harvey Weinstein and finally telling that story. I mean, that's really difficult reporting. And it was done really, really carefully and rigorously. And there's, so I think that we need to recognize that like a lot of that is happening and going on, and there's a a lot of robust, really great reporting. At the same time, I do think that it'd be a grappling and people need to come to terms with the fact that there are a lot of failures too. What one can do about that other than, show a commitment to getting your facts right, admitting, realizing that sometimes you're going to make mistakes and try to be really open about and putting out the correct information and about where you do get things wrong.
All right, great. Next question is, Judd, you mentioned a website targeting Black Americans appears to be an elaborate Russian propaganda effort. Can you explain that?
That's a piece that we published this afternoon. See who's one of our writers put that together. And, you kind of have to, it's hard to summarize, but you kind of have to read the article. But basically there was a website, a podcast, a social media channels and outlets and accounts that were purporting to be basically Black Americans and sort of a group, sort of an organic media outlet that was geared towards the African American community. But, as our reporter dug into it, like none of these people appear to be real. There's a lot of stilted English, and it basically has all the hallmarks of what has been identified as Russian propaganda, and also all of the similar sites with similar content were taken down. So the purpose of the piece and what it shows is that it's another level of activity beyond just social media, kind of standalone media outlet.
Hey, Judd, just to kind of ask a follow-up to that. Why do you think, the Russian propaganda is obviously there, and Donald Trump publicly obviously has issues with Russia publicly anyway. Why do you think Russia continues to essentially help him?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. I don't know exactly. I think that Russia had a lot of problems with Hillary Clinton, did not want Hillary Clinton to be elected. But also, there's a long history of, Russia seeking to destabilize the United States, not just the United States, destabilize. You saw it in Germany with elections there, in France, trying to destabilize a range of countries because they view it as in their strategic interest. So I think they view Trump as an asset, someone who's going to be sympathetic to their point of view, someone maybe that they can manipulate and eventually get more of what they want. I think ultimately they'd like to get a lot of the sanctions rolled back already. Congress kind of forced Trump's hand and passed with a veto-proof majority new sanctions, but there's been a report that I think came out yesterday that he's blown past the deadlines and hasn't actually implemented them yet. So I think they see someone they make a lot of ground with.
All right, great. The next question is going to come from user, and the question is, as promised, a little bit spicy, and it is, Judd. Wait, I clicked the wrong one. I've done this before, I swear. Sorry. Where did it go? I was just about, here we go. Judd, you have over 200,000 followers on Twitter. You criticize Donald Trump for tweeting only once about the Las Vegas shooting, while you tweeted about it multiple times, mostly to push a narrative, including erroneously citing the weapon used as an automatic with no retraction. How can we trust media figures when they brazenly lie and mischaracterize events to push specific narratives and not correct their previous statements?
I don't know if I characterize it as an automatic weapon. If I did, that was a mistake and I should have corrected it. That's fine. Yeah, whoever just came in, they can PM me. But when I make an error on Twitter, I do try to recognize that. I know there were semi-automatic weapons with bump stocks.
Yeah, right.
But
And I mean, he added a crank that was essentially turned it into an automatic weapon. So let's get serious, guys.
right. So I'm not sure. I don't I tweet 20 or 30 times a day, so I don't remember that exact one. But I do think that you're pushing a narrative, you have an agenda. Well, I think that the reality is that everyone has views, everyone has ideas and things that they believe and things that they don't believe. And I think the difference with what I'm doing and what ThinkProgress does is that we're open about it. This is a progressive site. We're here, we have progressive values, and then we're going to try to give you factual information. So, is there, I think I maybe tweeted 40,000 times. If I notice an error or someone points it out, I try to correct it. But I think that I don't think that it's I'm just ignoring the facts. I don't accept that.
Right. Next question, kind of a follow up, is Judd. Leading on to that, share your opinion on gun control.
Well, I think if you look at the experience in Australia, if you look at places like Japan that have more severe gun restrictions, probably more severe than we'd ever even consider in the United States, less people die. And so I don't, I would consider myself a supporter of the Second Amendment. I think people guns, but I also think that a lot of these guns that are in use now, the semi-automatics, are really guns that are variants of produced for the military in order to kill as many people as possible in a short period of time. And I think that restrictions on those kinds of guns could save people's lives. So that's my view on it. I think there's a lot of sensible things that we could do that wouldn't interfere with anyone's ability to have a gun for self-defense or have a gun to whatever they want to do, go to the range, but that could save a lot of people's lives. And, that seems to me to be worth thinking about a lot more seriously than we have previously.
All right, great. The next question is, Judd, what are your thoughts regarding the current implementation of Antifa in the United States and their incorporation of violence?
I think that I opposed to really anyone trying to achieve their political goals through violence, and so that applies to Antifa as well. So I'm not in support of that. I think probably to which they're viewed as a huge growing threat in the United States is probably a little bit overblown. Just if you look at the statistics of like incidents there's been versus other groups. But I don't think that's really the way that we're going to get, we're going to make progress. I do understand that a lot of people are very angry, especially when they see, a lot of really, really bigoted views coming from White House. So I understand the anger, but I think we have to avoid violence.
Okay, great. The next question, Judd, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here. I think I got disconnected for a second, but I think I'm back.
No, you're good. I can hear you perfect. The next question is, Prominent ESPN members and non religious viewers took issue when Tim Tebow would kneel and pray during football games, stating it was not the time or place to practice such freedoms. However, these same people are now saying that kneeling for the flag is justified despite there being an NFL policy stating members are to stand, and is widely known that the workplace is not a place to protest or express political beliefs. What are your thoughts on the double standard that I think exists, and do you think it is justified to express political beliefs on the job?
Yeah. Well, my job involves expressing political beliefs, so I think it depends on the job. I don't think there was anything wrong with Tim Tebow praying during football games. I think that the issue, it would be one thing. Obviously, their job is to play football. It would be one thing if this anthem impacted their ability to play. If instead of, playing, they just all knelt and didn't play a game. But this is something that's happening before the game. It's something that's, not just, it's a peaceful protest. And I think that there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't think it's interfering with their job. And I do think actually that there are, just because it doesn't mean you've forfeited your First Amendment rights and your ability to express yourself, as long as that expression doesn't interfere with your ability to perform your job well. So, I don't, obviously, there's a lot of hypocrisy. I will myself acknowledge that I've probably been hypocritical on issues from time to time. So I don't doubt that there are people on ESPN who are kind of taking both sides of this, but to me, I don't really see a problem with either.
All right. Thank you. So the next question is, Judd, why are progressives so adamant about drug rights and abortion rights, but are against the private individual's right to own firearms?
Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. What are progressives? Why are progressives essentially? Why are liberals so adamant about drug rights and abortion rights, but they're against the private individual's right to own a gun?
I mean, I guess there's probably some liberals who are against the right to own a gun, but I'm not against the right to own a gun, and I think most people aren't against the right to own a gun. I think it's just about having appropriate regulation to try to save people's lives. I think the issue of abortion is really about respecting people's autonomy, respecting a woman's autonomy over her own body. So I think most liberals expect and would want regulation around an abortion and how. So I don't see a huge conflict there.
Thank you. Next question is, Judd, how do we combat the right's demonization of liberals and leftists and maintain our dignity at the same time?
Interesting question. Can't worry about it. That there are people whose to be convinced and whose job it is to try to undermine your reputation and your credibility. And I think it's important to listen to our that really want to talk to you. But then I think it's good to just ignore a whole bunch of other people. So that's, I think a lot of the worst sort of vitriol that you see comes from people who have something that important to say, and you can fairly safely ignore that.
All right. Next question is, Judd, do you think Donald Trump is a racist and he secretly and quietly and not known through tweets, media messages, so on and so forth, supports the alt-right and white supremacy to gain votes?
I think that he does that. Was that the question?
Essentially, the first part was, is he a racist? And the second part is, do you think he does that to maintain those voters at the booth?
I think he has a clear political strategy to court white supremacists, white nationalists, and people who might not fall into those categories but who sympathize with those views. I mean, till a few weeks ago was his chief strategist, and we've learned that Breitbart, which he was running, was really in direct contact with those folks and served the similar purpose, that they would take information and content directly from white nationalists. Milo was getting them to send him content and information, and then they would kind of sand down the roughest edges and put it out there in a way that was not explicitly marked as racist content. So I do think that it's a strategy that he's pursuing, and I think it probably explains why he does seem to have a relatively stable base of people who I think it can be comforting to have validated some things that you believe or have thought that you might have been a little worried about or might not have been comfortable saying. And now you have someone who's very powerful who does say a lot of those things explicitly.
All right, great. The next question is kind of a longer one, and it is, Judd, conservatives are often bashed for opposing quote unquote progressive causes, but it seems to me like many of the things pushed by progressives are actually negative steps forward for society, i.e., the normalization of pedophilia, the push for hate speech laws, the use of violence against political adversaries, pushing for trans children to get gender reassignment surgery, etc. Are there any so-called quote unquote progressive movements that you oppose?
Oh, I think so. Absolutely. One thing, encouraging children to get gender reassignment surgery. And if they were, I would definitely oppose that. But I think there's a lot of places where, or I would, maybe not a lot of places, but there's definitely some places where I disagree with what's going on. One of the things I've been very skeptical of over the years is campaign finance reform. I think fundamentally everything that's been tried usually makes the problem much worse by driving it into places that are more opaque. We've driven a lot of money basically from the campaigns, which have pretty good reporting. Presidential campaign during the election has to report every month. You can kind of find out what they're doing, seeing if they're doing anything, and then into sort of darker places that have no transparency at all. So that's one example. There's definitely places where I disagree. Ultimately the website, which is where a lot of my work goes into, isn't really about me and my personal views, but more about our mission, our overall mission as a publication. So there's plenty of things that they go up on the site that I might not necessarily like agree with. So that's okay too.
All right, great. The next question is, at what point in the pregnancy does the fetus become a child? As science progresses, people can develop outside of the mother and be born in a test tube. How can a fetus then be considered part of the woman's body?
It's inside her body, so and it's connected to her. So I think that it is kind of part of her body. I don't want to get into the because I'm not a doctor or a scientist, but I do think that if your goal is to number of abortions, that the way to do it is to make sure that people have access to effective birth control. I don't think there's many people who go around and sort of set out with like a goal to. So I don't think that is to reduce abortions, that the way to do it is to, ban abortion. I don't think that's going to be an effective method. I do think that you could say, and I do think it's not a terrible public policy to say, look, an abortion is an example of where, kind of something has gone a little bit awry, and we should set up, make sure that people get have access to birth control. And I think when you do that, one of the things that's driven down abortion is, Obamacare and people having wider access, more people just having insurance. That's the way I think about it.
Totally agree. All right. Next question is, Judd, do you think CNN is fake news, and do you think fake news exists?
Definitely exists. You can read about sites. I think Washington Post had a pretty good story. I mean, there are just people who are sitting on their couch making up news stories because you can manipulate the Facebook algorithm pretty well, and you can make money that way. So I definitely think there are people out there who are just making things up. I don't think CNN is one of those places. Not to say they don't get anything wrong. I mean, that's what I think the distinction is totally lost. Anyone who's producing journalism is going to, from time to time, get things wrong. Just like anyone anywhere in life sometimes makes a mistake. And if you're responsible, sorry, I'm going to go and get something to drink so that I can keep my voice going. But if you're responsible, I think that you acknowledge that and correct it. But that's not fake news, just happening to happen if you happen to get something wrong. What's fake news is if you make something up, and we've seen that in the mainstream media too. You had public. There's people from time to time who have just made up stories because they wanted to be famous or they didn't want to do the work. But CNN, I have issues with CNN a lot of the time. I don't think that they necessarily should pay people who are just strong partisans to comment. They kind of got rid of their regular stable of conservative commentators, or at least sidelined them somewhat, and just found people who were pro-Trump just to have balance. But I don't think they're fake news. Still here?
Sorry about that. The next question is kind of on the media figures that are, some are in the mainstream, some are more YouTube, so on and so forth. But what are your take on figures such as Milo, Alex Jones, Ben Shapiro, Culture, so on and so forth? Are they adding anything to the political landscape and the betterment of America, or no?
Well, I'm not fans of any of those folks. I think they fall into some different categories. Jones obviously is fake news and just making things up, preying on people's fears and paranoia, and is quite dangerous. I think that Milo, as the BuzzFeed piece indicated, is really laundering white nationalism, some plausible deniability, which is now gone. Coulter, I think, is mostly just kind of a sideshow and just saying things to try to get attention. I think would be the slightly more, although I probably disagree with everything he says, I think would be slightly more thoughtful than the other three. So I put him in a slightly different category, but yeah, not huge fans.
All right, thank you. So the next question is, how can you blindly attack the Koch brothers while taking money and orders from George Soros Foundation?
So I don't take any. We're editorially independent, so we publish what we want. Over the years, Progress, which houses ThinkProgress, I am fairly confident has taken money from the Open Society Foundation. And then some of that, then they in turn help fund ThinkProgress, the Center for American Progress. But that, he's sort of pulling the strings. I know it's like a popular fantasy, and I see it in my Twitter mentions and such, but that's just not how it works. I'm the editor-in-chief of the site, and I decide what goes up. Once heard from George Soros or anyone at the Open Society Foundation about anything we've ever written, either in advance of writing it or after we've written it or ever. Never heard from them.
Love it. All right, next question kind of relates to this. Do you endorse every opinion piece posted on your website? We want to really give us insight on your opinion. Let us know the man behind the website.
I think I agree with every single thing that's up there, clearly. It may just be, especially the more opinionated sites. We have a race columnist, we have a columnist who does climate change, a columnist who works on legal issues. And yeah, I may not, I don't think I agree with all of it. I'm trying to think if I could think of an example of something that I explicitly disagree with. It's hard to say. But I definitely recall hearing things. I mean, I think generally my values are reflected in the site, but that doesn't mean that each piece is going to be reflected in my values. I hope that maybe this discussion is giving you a little bit of a sense of who I am and what I believe, but it's hard to do so in just a few minutes. But I'm hoping that maybe you get a little bit of a chance.
No, absolutely. And just remind everybody what we're talking about. I just linked it again, thinkprogress.org. I will say it goes great with a cup of coffee in the morning. Check it out, guys. I read it. I read Breitbart. I read thinkprogress.org. I read CNN. I read Fox. Go to Yahoo, whatever. I check them all out. So go read those. We got righties, lefties, we got everybody here, but it's always good to hear. Well, in the case of thinkprogress.org, there's both sides really on that website. But there's also sports, economics, stocks, so on and so forth. So go check it out. I just linked it. So Judd, our next question is, An interesting one. You think it's good that WAPO owner has a $600 CIA contract to provide cloud service, $600 million. I was gonna say CIA contract to provide cloud service storage.
I don't think that's ideal. You know, when you have I'll say two things. One, I think in one sense, Jeff Bezos has been good for the Washington Post because he's allowed them to hire more journalists and to do more work, and I think they do a lot of good work. At the same time, when you have a company as large as Amazon and people as powerful as Jeff Bezos, I think it does create potential conflicts. And you're right. The idea of having financial interests tied up in your relationship with the federal government could be a problem. I think it's going to be up to him to doesn't interfere with their the process of news writing and editing. And I was actually just at a conference and listened to a talk by David Fairholt, and he said that someone actually asked him, Jeff Bezos, that question in a staff Q&A, and he said that didn't have any impact, write whatever you want, I'll handle any blowback. Hopefully that is what's happening. I don't have any way to actually know since I'm not there.
Thank you. Are you familiar with, before I ask a question, Ben BuzzFeed Smith?
No, Ben.
All right. So the question is, do you think Ben BuzzFeed Smith at BuzzFeed overstepped his bounds at any point during the McCain/Obama election?
The McCain-Obama election. I guess I'm not. In Obama election, I don't believe he was at BuzzFeed.
No, bro, it was a question, so I figured I don't even know what that was, but
so I believe he was at Politico. I can't remember exactly what he was doing then. I think that there's a lot of good stuff on BuzzFeed on the news side. I think they probably get a little bit of a reputation based on what's going on the other side, the entertainment side of their site. But generally, I think they do pretty good work. Some of the stuff I feel like we wouldn't do. Some of the stuff is stuff we'd love to do. Like every site, it's a mixed bag.
Right. All right. Next question is, what is your thoughts on affirmative action?
I was actually talking about this with my wife before we started this, and I think the interesting thing about affirmative action is if you look at just take colleges, benefits from preferences at colleges, the group that benefits the most is white men because all of the advantages around legacy admissions, alumni. There's just a lot of advantages of being a white man. And so I think that there are still systemic that need to be addressed with programs like affirmative action. I don't believe we're past that. And I also think that for each, for a place like an educational institution, it's valuable for the students to have a diverse student body. I would be largely supportive of them. Of obviously, there's a lot of different ways you could construct an affirmative action program. Some might be better than others, but I think the general idea of it to try to make sure you've got a diverse, student body or whatever institution you're talking about, I think is good and makes sense.
All right, thank you. The next question is, Judd, is the Open Society Foundation liable for money spent on U.S. elections?
Well, I don't really understand that question. I don't know the liable.
It's kind of an odd question.
don't understand. If that person wants to just like clarify what they buy it, I'd be happy to try to take a shot at it.
Yeah, whoever asked that, if you want to clarify, Judd, I'd be happy to ask. I kind of don't get it either. I don't know, like, are you saying the outcome of the election, so on and so forth? I mean, I'm not really sure, or maybe a protest, someone got hurt, or, but anyway. So, next question, Judd. What do you think about 4chan and poll?
If I say something bad, I'm sure there'll be some crazy thing done against me. But anyway, I'm not. I think that there can be a problem with online communities that where people can reinforce just their own sort of destructive behavior. You know, I'm not super familiar with it. I don't hang out there, but from what I know, it doesn't seem like a place where a lot of good things come out of.
Fair enough. I agree. 4chan is complete shit. All right. So if anybody's wondering, don't send Judd messages. You can dox me and send me messages. 4chan is garbage full of Nazis. And if anybody here likes 4chan, they can leave. All right. Next question. Judd, what are your thoughts on Andrew Breitbart and his take on citizen journalists?
I think that Breitbart himself, I didn't love the site when he was running it, but I think it was a much better site than it was what it's become. I think that, you know, there is something to be said about a true kind of populist movement or website that's kind of coming from the right. I definitely think there's like a lot of there is a legitimate space there, especially when you've got, you know, prior to this point, so much of the Republican Party kind of hung up in all sorts of, you know, very wealthy folks. But I think it's changed a lot, and I just think that now it traffics in just a lot of hatred and bigotry, and I'm not a fan anymore. So I think ultimately Breitbart had something that was a bit himself. I think it had some issues with that, but not as bad as it is now.
All right. Next question is, Judd, do you think that Donald Trump will possibly be impeached in his first term? And if he makes it to his second, do you think he'll be impeached during that time, or do you think he will never be impeached?
I think that a lot of it has to do with the 2018 election. I think if the Democrats were to retake the House in 2018, fairly, I wouldn't say likely, but I think there'd be a very reasonable chance that Trump would be impeached. Whether he would be convicted then by the Senate, you know, the House impeaches, the Senate then tries the case, I think would be much more difficult. Impeached and then acquitted by the Senate as well. But I do definitely think it's a possibility. If Republicans are in control of the House, I do not believe he will be impeached.
All right, great. Next question is, Judd, back in U.S. history, the Bill of Rights was described as a oppression of the state's laws. Do you think we should edit the Second Amendment, right to bear arms, to something that is reasonable now?
I don't think you really need to edit the Second Amendment. We have, you know, it's not like you currently are able to have any kind of gun. Already are all sorts of restrictions on it. It's just a matter of where we have the restrictions. So I know that, you know, there's been columns written about how we need to repeal the Second Amendment. I think that that's kind of this very maximalist view of the Second Amendment that's been adopted recently by the NRA is a pretty new phenomenon, and I don't think we really need to buy into it.
All right, great. Judd, what are your thoughts regarding Steve Bannon and his movement taking place with Breitbart, and also his comments today saying that Donald Trump has only a 30% chance of making it through his first term?
I don't know if he said that publicly. I know that was in I think there was a article in New York Magazine that said that. That the Steve Bannon to the top political strategist in the White House is something that people are going to look back on as a really dark period in American history. I think that it at Breitbart is a really just nasty, negative force, and am actually still amazed each day. There is so much acceptance for that brand of politics that they still have, even people who are sort of considered Lindsey Graham will go on Breitbart radio and associate themselves with Breitbart and Bannon pretty willingly. So, I think it's a problem. Much to do about it. Basically, what I do about it is, I've got my own site, and we try to put out things that we think are more responsible and more constructive.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
All right, sorry about that. All right. The next question is, Judd, what are your views on Trump's upcoming tax plans, and what do you expect on it?
He's got a tax plan. Saying is a middle tax plan. Really benefit people very much, except if you make a very high income or if you're a corporation. There was a study by the Tax Policy Center. By the 10th year of this, 80% of the benefits will go to the 10% or the top 1%, I believe. Benefits to the top 1% by 2027. So as a plan, it's not an amazing plan because you're helping the people who have done pretty well, the very top, as far as people who have seen their incomes increase over the last couple of decades. As far as its chances of passage, I think the Republicans have pretty much everything at stake. Trump has pretty much everything at stake. He really needs to win the problems with Obamacare and his failure to get anything done there. So, and it's still very tricky. They've got some issues with state and local tax and deduction and getting rid of that. That's going to create some issues with some Republicans who are in blue states. So I think it's kind of up in the air. I would say I would put it at maybe 50-50 that they get something done, maybe 60-40 in favor of them getting something done, just because I think they kind of have to get something done, but they've had to do things in the past and failed too, so I wouldn't put it past them.
All right, great. The next question's a bit off topic from politics, but still involved, definitely, given the power these two organizations have. The question is, Judd, yesterday the Boy Scouts of America announced they will now be allowing girls to join and gain the Eagle Scout badge. The Girl Scouts was very public against this move by the Boy Scouts and were caught off guard, considered an attack to the neck. The Boy Scouts recently accepted gay and transgenders. Is it okay with that they now accept girls, or are they going too far just to get members?
I think that struggled with the LGBTQ issues and a lot of their, I think, failure to kind of modernize. And so I see them not really a of a step. I see it more as an effort to get more members. I think that's really what it was about. They've been shrinking, and obviously this is a way for them to grow a bit. There already was the Girl Scouts though, and it's not like they're going to have, you know, troops. They're still going to have girls troops and boys troops, so it's not creating a big difference. So I kind of view it as a little more of a ploy, personally.
All right, great. So next question is, the most popular guns used for homicide are often cheaper pistols. Does this call for regulations on these more accessible weapons? We're going to be guns into the ground by the end of this one, Judd.
Yeah, I'm very I'm giving you a very detailed view of my views on gun control. I think that there are probably, to me, with handguns and things of that nature, it's more about just having real background checks, where we either finance the background check system so that you can complete it within 72 hours, or you don't automatically let people have weapons after 72 hours. I think you can have more restrictions where if people have issues with domestic violence or other things that make them at risk of using it to harm someone else, that the hands of those kinds of folks. So I would see it more of that. That's probably more the way I would go with it. Sure.
All right. Next question is, Judd, what are your thoughts on the legalization of marijuana?
I think it should be legalized. I think that the reason that it's illegal now is mostly based on the racial makeup of people who drink alcohol versus people who smoke marijuana. I think that being it illegal has at different times, and this might be changing now that some states have legalized it, but fueling a lot of organized crime and other things in Mexico and elsewhere, creating a lot of cash for them. So I think you could do a lot of good overall. Definitely would be good to take that load off of the criminal justice system for people who aren't really hurting anyone else. So yeah, I'm a pretty strongly in favor of legalizing marijuana.
All right, great. Next question is, what are your thoughts on the progressive movements to give rights to pedosexuals?
Give rights to who?
Pedosexuals?
Really know what that.
You know what that is?
I don't really know what that.
I was kind of hoping you would, because I have no idea what it is.
Oh, if I find out, maybe then I'll have an opinion.
Pedosexuals are people naturally, here we go, attracted to small children.
I don't any of that. So
There we go. That was the easy one. That was a layup. I'm glad we're on the same page. Next question is Pepe considered a hate symbol?
Actually did an article where we interviewed the guy who created Pepe. I don't think that Pepe at its origination was a hate symbol. Obviously, the way it's used sometimes now, it can be, but I don't think it's fundamentally a hate symbol.
All right, great. The next question is, as drone technology improves and drones manage to be smaller, perhaps the size of barely noticeable insects, would you call for restrictions on drone ownership to the extent that you would control guns?
I don't not candidly thought through a question like this very in a lot of detail. I do think that there's a lot of privacy issues around drones, especially as they become cheaper and more accessible. And so I don't know if it's about restricting usage, but I think that definitely people should be mindful of other people's privacy, and maybe there needs to be some sort of regulation or legal framework that ensures that people respect other people's privacy.
All right, so we're near the end, and I'm going to ask you two more questions. The last one is, Judd, do you think transgenders should have to use the bathroom that they were originally born as, or the bathroom that they are now transformed into?
Well, I would encourage people not to use the term transgenders, but I think that should use the bathroom that they choose.
What was that?
I think that they should use the restroom that they identify with.
Fair enough. All right, so the last question is going to be, Judd, number one, before we leave here, thank you so much for stopping by. I want to remind everybody to check out ThinkProgress.org. It is on my favorite bar, and I do read it in the mornings. You guys post quite a bit, and you have some pretty active journalists on there. So, guys, check it out. It's a great site. I know it sucks in the morning to wake up sometimes, and it's one I flip to along with, well, I'm a Yahoo MSN, and I hit up Think Progress, and great site. Depending on what you're looking for, there's quite a bit of different topics on there. So check it out. I just linked it. And Judd, the last question is, in your opinion, and we want a yes or no, is Donald Trump going to be the president for the next 7 years? If you had to guess.
I think if I had to go yes or no, I would say super confident in that. Because I think fundamentally, politics is really unpredictable. If you look at a lot of my writing, the campaign, in this campaign, a lot of it was kind of chastising people for dismissing Donald Trump and the ability for him to win. And so I wouldn't dismiss the possibility. Project things out, and you see him at 38%, approval ratings. And the fact that he really just did eke it out the last time, versus a candidate who I don't think was super well suited for the time. A lot of history that was in a lot of extraordinary circumstances down the stretch with the Comey investigation. It's probably likely that somebody could be more successful. So I would say no, but I'm not super confident.
All right, well, Judd, thank you so much. We appreciate it, your time and everything else, and answering everybody's questions. You're always welcome back, obviously, with 2018, 2020 coming up. We want you here. We love to hear from you. Everyone appreciates it, guys. Again, check out thinkprogress.org. And Judd, again, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Take care.